Sarah Thompson's trembling fingers clutched the briefcase, stuffed with more cash than she'd ever seen. Her heart pounding as she realized a single moment would define the rest of her life. As sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer with each passing second, Sarah knew her next move would either save her family or destroy everything she held dear. The fluorescent lights of Smallville Supermarket cast a harsh glow over Sarah Thompson's tired face as she mechanically scanned the last items of her shift. The beep of the scanner had become a mind-numbing rhythm, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of plastic bags and mumbled thank yous from customers. As the clock ticked closer to 9 p.m., Sarah felt the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders, a familiar ache that seemed to grow heavier with each passing week. "That'll be $43.27, she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The elderly woman across the counter fumbled with her purse, coins spilling onto the conveyor belt. Sarah patiently helped gather them, her mind already drifting to the stack of bills waiting for her at home. "Sorry, dear," the woman apologized, her wrinkled hand shaking slightly. "These old fingers aren't what they used to be." Sarah's forced smile softened into something more genuine. "No worries, Mrs. Geller. We've got all the time in the world." It was a lie, of course. Sarah had exactly 12 minutes until her shift ended, and then a race against time to pick up her son, Ethan, from the neighbors before the late fees kicked in. But Mrs. Geller was a regular, one of the few bright spots in Sarah's monotonous days, and she deserved those extra moments of kindness. As Mrs. Geller shuffled away, Sarah caught sight of Mike Rodriguez, the store manager, hovering near the customer service desk. His normally affable face was creased with worry, and he kept glancing at the near-empty parking lot visible through the store's wide front windows. Sarah's stomach clenched. She'd overheard whispers of potential layoffs, of the store's struggles to keep afloat in Smallville's withering economy. One more hit to a town already on its knees. The last customer cleared out just as the clock struck 9. Sarah began the familiar closing routine, counting the till, wiping down her station, restocking the impulse buy items that lined the checkout lane. Her muscles moved on autopilot, leaving her mind free to wander to less pleasant territories. The rent was due next week, and she was still short by a couple $100. Ethan's inhaler prescription needed refilling, and the cost had gone up again. The car was making an ominous rattling sound that she couldn't afford to ignore much longer. "Sarah?" Mike's voice snapped her out of her spiral. He stood at the end of her lane, keys jangling nervously in his hand. "Can I talk to you for a sec?" Sarah's heart rate spiked. This was it, the layoff she'd been dreading. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sure, Mike. What's up?" He glanced around, making sure the other closing staff were out of earshot. "Listen, I know things have been tough lately, for everyone." He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "Corporate's been breathing down my neck about cutting costs. I've been fighting to keep everyone on, but..." He trailed off, unable to meet her eyes. Sarah felt her world tilt. "Mike, please. I need this job." "Ethan, no." Mike interrupted, holding up a hand. "I'm not letting you go, Sarah. You're one of our best, but I can't guarantee full-time hours anymore. For anyone." The words hung heavy in the air between them. "I'm sorry. I wish I had better news." Relief and dread warred in Sarah's chest. She still had a job, but with reduced hours? The precarious balance of her finances threatened to topple entirely. "I understand," she managed to say, though the words tasted bitter. "Thanks for letting me know." Mike nodded, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. As he turned to leave, he paused. "You're a good egg, Sarah. This town doesn't deserve what's happening to." With that, he walked away, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the soft hum of the refrigeration units. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and worried calculations. Sarah's ancient sedan groaned as she pulled into the cracked driveway of her small rental house. Mrs. Patel from next door was already waiting on the porch, a sleeping Ethan cradled in her arms. "So sorry, Mrs. Patel," Sarah whispered as she carefully took her son. "Work ran late." Mrs. Patel waved off the apology with a gentle smile. "No trouble, Beta. The boy is a joy. Her kind eyes crinkled with concern as she took in Sarah's exhausted face. "You work too hard. Take care of yourself, yes?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She carried Ethan inside, his warm weight both a comfort and a reminder of everything at stake. As she tucked him into bed, his eyes fluttered open briefly. "Mama?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "Shh, baby. Everything's okay. Go back to sleep." Sarah smoothed his hair, marveling at how much he looked like his father in the dim light. The thought brought a familiar pang of grief and anger. Mark had bailed when Ethan was barely a year old, leaving nothing but a hastily scrawled note, and a void that Sarah had been struggling to fill ever since. Once Ethan was settled, Sarah sank onto the worn couch in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of unpaid bills and unfulfilled dreams. The walls of the small house seemed to close in around her, suffocating in their familiarity. She allowed herself one moment of weakness, one choked sob muffled by a throw pillow, before straightening her spine and reaching for her laptop. There had to be a way out of this. Extra shifts, a second job, anything to keep their heads above water. As she scrolled through job listings, each more depressing than the last, a notification popped up on her screen. It was an email from Emily Chun, her best friend and the only person who truly understood the depth of Sarah's struggles. "Hey girl," the message read. "I know things are rough right now, but I've got some news that might cheer you up. The community center is hosting a fundraiser for the shelter next weekend. I was hoping you might volunteer. It's a chance to get out, have some fun, and who knows, maybe network a little. Plus, I miss your face. Let me know." Yeah, Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. Emily had been a rock through everything. Mark's abandonment, Ethan's health scares, the endless cycle of financial worries. Where Sarah saw hopelessness, Emily always managed to find a glimmer of opportunity. It was a quality Sarah both admired and envied. She typed out a quick reply, agreeing to help with the fundraiser. As she hit send, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back at her looked older than her 28 years. Worry lines etched deep around eyes that had once sparkled with optimism. When had she become this person? This tired, desperate shadow of her former self? A soft cough from Ethan's room snapped her out of her melancholy. Sarah moved quietly to check on him, relief washing over her as she saw his chest rising and falling steadily. The moonlight filtering through his window cast a silvery glow on his sleeping face. And in that moment, Sarah felt a fierce surge of love and determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about giving Ethan the chances she never had, about breaking the cycle of struggle that had defined her own childhood. She thought of her parents, worn down by years of factory work and shattered dreams. They had done their best, but their best hadn't been enough to escape the gravitational pull of poverty that seemed to trap so many in Smallville. Sarah gently closed Ethan's door and returned to the living room, her mind racing. The fundraiser might not solve all their problems, but it was a start, a chance to remind herself that she wasn't alone in this fight. And maybe, just maybe, an opportunity to change their fortunes. As she prepared for bed, Sarah allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to turn things around. She fell asleep to the gentle whirring of Ethan's air purifier, dreaming of a future where the weight on her shoulders finally lifted. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood as she rushed through their morning routine. Ethan was cranky, his breathing a little more labored than usual, which meant an extra dose of his inhaler and a lot of coaxing to get him dressed and fed. "Come on, sweetie," Sarah urged, trying to keep the edge of frustration out of her voice. "We're gonna be late for school." Ethan's lower lip trembled. "I don't feel good, Mama. Can't I stay home?" Sarah knelt down, cupping his face in her hands. His skin felt warm, but not feverish. "I know you don't feel great, buddy, but remember what we talked about. Sometimes we have to do things even when they're hard." She saw the conflict in his eyes, the desire to be brave warring with genuine discomfort. It broke her heart a little, knowing she couldn't just scoop him up and protect him from the world, that wasn't the lesson she wanted to teach him. "Tell you what," she said, inspiration striking. "If you make it through the whole day, We'll have a special movie night. Your pick." Ethan's face lit up. "Even Spider-Man?" Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. "Even Spider-Man? Now, let's get moving, okay?" As they pulled up to Smallville Elementary, Sarah caught sight of Emily waving from the drop-off lane. She was surrounded by a group of kids, all chattering excitedly. Emily worked as a teacher's aide, a job that suited her endless patience and natural warmth perfectly. "There's Miss Chun," Ethan exclaimed, his earlier reluctance forgotten. "Can I go say hi?" Sarah nodded, watching as he bounded out of the car towards Emily. She greeted him with a big hug, then looked up to catch Sarah's eye. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the concern in her friend's gaze. She managed a weak smile and a thumbs up, not wanting to worry Emily further. As she pulled away from the school, Sarah's mind drifted back to the conversation with Mike the night before. Reduced hours meant an even tighter budget, fewer groceries, maybe letting some bills slide. The thought made her stomach churn. She had always prided herself on paying her debts, on setting a good example for Ethan. But pride didn't keep the lights on or fill an empty fridge. The rest of the day passed in a blur of customers and calculations. Sarah found herself counting every penny, wondering if she could stretch her meager savings just a little further. By the time her shift ended, she felt drained, both physically and emotionally. As she walked through the parking lot, keys in hand, a glint of metal caught her eye. There, partially hidden beneath a shopping cart, was a sleek black briefcase. Sarah hesitated, looking around. The lot was empty save for a few employee cars. No one in sight. Curiosity got the better of her. She approached the briefcase, half expecting it to be empty or filled with worthless papers. But as she lifted it, she felt the unmistakable weight of something substantial inside. Sarah's heart raced as she popped the locks. The lid swung open, revealing neat stacks of crisp $100 bills. More money than she had ever seen in one place. More than enough to solve all her problems in one fell swoop. For a moment, just a moment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what she could do with that money. Pay off debts, buy Ethan new clothes, maybe even put a down payment on a small house. A fresh start, free from the constant worry that had become her constant companion. But as quickly as the fantasy formed, shame washed over her. This wasn't her money. Someone was probably frantic, searching for it right now. And what kind of example would she be setting for Ethan if she took it? With trembling hands, Sarah closed the briefcase. She knew what she had to do, even as every fiber of her being screamed at her to reconsider. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. Time to do the right thing, she whispered to herself, heading back towards the store with the briefcase clutched tightly to her chest. Sarah's heart pounded as she re-entered the supermarket, the weight of the briefcase seeming to increase with each step. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made her feel exposed. She spotted Mike near the customer service desk, his brow furrowed as he pored over a stack of papers. "Mike?" Her voice came out as a croak, and she cleared her throat before trying again. "Mike, I found something in the parking lot." He looked up, confusion giving way to shock as his eyes landed on the briefcase. "What's that?" Sarah placed it on the counter, her fingers lingering on the cool metal for a moment before she stepped back. "I found it under a cart outside. It's full of money, Mike. A lot of money." Mike's eyes widened as he carefully opened the case. A low whistle escaped his lips as he took in the neatly stacked bills. "Jesus, Sarah, this must be at least $500,000. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. $500,000. It was more than she'd make in a decade at her current job. More than enough to change her and Ethan's lives forever. She felt a moment of vertigo, the enormity of her decision threatening to overwhelm her. "We need to call the police," she said, as much to convince herself as to inform Mike. Someone must be looking for this. Mike nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the open briefcase. "Yeah, of course. You did the right thing bringing this in, Sarah." He paused, a flicker of something doubt, temptation, crossing his face. Although what?" Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended, edged by the fear that Mike might voice the very thoughts she was trying to suppress. He shook his head, as if clearing away an unwelcome idea. "Nothing. You're right. We'll call it in." He reached for the phone, but before he could dial, the automatic doors swished open. A man burst in, his expensive suit rumpled and his face flushed with panic. His wild eyes scanned the store before landing on the briefcase. Relief flooded his features, followed quickly by suspicion as he took in Sarah and Mike. "That's mine," he said, striding towards them with purpose. "I've been looking everywhere for." Sarah instinctively took a step back, intimidated by the man's intensity. Mike, however, held his ground. "Sir, we were just about to call the authorities. We'll need to verify." "Verify?" The man scoffed. "It's right there. Just give it to me, and we can forget this whole thing happened." He reached for the briefcase, but Mike smoothly slid it out of reach. "I'm sorry, sir, but we need to follow proper procedures. Can you tell us what's inside?" The man's face darkened. "Listen, I don't have time for this. That case contains $500,000 in cash. It's for a business deal, and I'm already late. Now, hand it over before I call my lawyer." Sarah watched the exchange with growing unease. Something about the man's story didn't sit right with her. Why would anyone carry so much cash for a legitimate business deal? And why was he so resistant to involving the authorities? Before she could voice her concerns, the sound of sirens cut through the tension. 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, their lights painting the store interior in alternating flashes of red and blue. The man's face drained of color. Without another word, he turned and bolted for the exit. Sarah and Mike exchanged bewildered looks as Officer Johnson, a Smallville PD veteran, entered the store with his partner. "Everything all right here?" Johnson asked, his hand resting casually on his holster. "We got a call about a disturbance." Mike quickly filled the officers in on the situation, gesturing to the briefcase still sitting on the counter. Johnson's eyebrows shot up as he inspected the contents. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Looks like you two stumbled onto something big. We're going to need to take statements from both of you." As Sarah recounted her discovery of the briefcase, she felt a mix of relief and lingering doubt. Had she done the right thing? The man's reaction suggested the money might not have been entirely legal. What if it could have been put to better use, helping people in Smallville? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on answering Officer Johnson's questions. As the adrenaline of the evening began to fade, exhaustion set in. All Sarah wanted was to go home, hug Ethan, and forget about briefcases full of money and mysterious businessmen. "You did good, Sarah," Johnson said as he finished taking notes. "Not everyone would have been so honest. The department will probably want to recognize you for this." Sarah managed a weak smile. "I just did what anyone would do." Johnson shook his head. "Trust me, kid, not everyone would have. You should be proud." As the officers prepared to leave with the briefcase in custody, Mike pulled Sarah aside. "Listen, I know things have been tough lately. What you did tonight, it shows real character. I can't promise anything, but I'm going to fight like hell to keep your hours up. We need more people like you around here." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Thanks, Mike. That means a lot." The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Sarah felt proud of her decision, but a nagging voice in the back of her mind wondered if she just passed up her only chance at a better life. As she pulled into her driveway, she saw Mrs. Patel waiting on the porch again, this time with a worried expression. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Patel said as soon as Sarah was within earshot. "Ethan's not feeling well. He's been coughing a lot, and his breathing sounds strange." Fear gripped Sarah's heart as she rushed inside. She found Ethan curled up on the couch, his breathing labored and wheezy. His inhaler lay discarded on the coffee table. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Rough day?" Ethan nodded weakly. "Couldn't breathe good at school," he managed between gasps. "Miss Chun helped me use the Y inhaler." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She should have listened to her instincts this morning and kept him home. "Okay, sweetie, we're going to get you feeling better, all right?" She administered another dose from the inhaler, then called the after-hours line for Ethan's doctor. As she waited on hold, Sarah's mind raced. The inhaler clearly wasn't doing enough. They needed to see a specialist, maybe try a different medication, all of which cost money they didn't have. For a fleeting moment, Sarah thought of the briefcase full of cash. With that kind of money, she could get Ethan the best care available. But she pushed the thought away, ashamed of even considering it. The doctor finally came on the line, listened to Sarah's description of Ethan's symptoms, and recommended they go to the emergency room. Sarah's stomach dropped, and a visit meant bills they couldn't afford, missed work, more strain on their already precarious situation. But looking at Ethan's pale face and hearing the whistle in his breath, she knew they had no choice. She scooped him up, grabbed her keys, and headed for the door. As they drove to the hospital, Sarah's mind whirled with worry. How would they pay for this? What if Ethan needed to be admitted? She thought of the reduced hours at work, of the stack of unpaid bills at home, of the constant struggle just to keep their heads above water. But then Ethan's small hand found hers, squeezing with surprising strength. "It's okay, Mama," wheezed. "We're tough cookies, remember?" Sarah felt her heart swell with love and determination. They were tough cookies, her and Ethan. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And somehow, someway, they would find a way through. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Sarah took a deep breath, one crisis at a time. Right now, Ethan needed her to be strong and focused. The rest, well, the rest would have to wait. Little did Sarah know, the events set in motion by her decision to return the briefcase were about to change their lives in ways she could never have imagined. As she helped Ethan out of the car, the first drops of rain began to fall, washing away the dust of the day and hinting at the possibility of new beginnings. Inside the bustling emergency room, Sarah's mind drifted back to the briefcase, to the mysterious businessman, to the choice she had made. For better or worse, she had set them on a new path. What that path would bring, only time would tell. The emergency room buzzed with frenetic energy as Sarah guided Ethan through the sliding doors. The stark white walls and antiseptic smell brought back memories of too many similar visits, each one a stark reminder of the precarious nature of Ethan's health. She approached the intake desk, Ethan's wheezing breaths a constant soundtrack to her worry. "My son," Sarah began, her voice tight with concern. "He's having trouble breathing. Asthma attack." The nurse behind the desk, a kind-faced woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair, nodded sympathetically. "All right, honey, let's get him checked in right away." Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she asked Sarah a series of rapid-fire questions about Ethan's medical history. As they waited for a doctor, Sarah's phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. She ignored it, focusing on rubbing soothing circles on Ethan's back as he leaned against her, his breath coming in shallow gasps. But the buzzing continued, an insistent drone that mirrored the anxiety thrumming through her veins. Finally, she pulled out the phone, expecting to see Mike's number, perhaps calling about the aftermath of the briefcase incident. Instead, she was surprised to see Emily's name flashing on the screen. With a quick glance to make sure Ethan was stable, she answered, "Mom, what's going on?" Emily's voice came through, breathless and excited. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this. Turn on the news right now." "I can't," Sarah replied, confusion coloring her tone. "We're in the EA. Ethan's having another attack." "Oh God, is he okay?" Emily's excitement immediately gave way to concern. "Do you need me to come down there?" Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for her friend's unwavering support. "No, we're okay for now. But what's this about the news?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah could almost see Emily biting her lip, trying to decide how to proceed. "It's about that briefcase you found, Sarah. It was all over the local news. They're calling you a hero." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What? Why?" "Apparently, that money was part of some huge drug operation," Emily explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The guy who came looking for it? He was working for a cartel that's been terrorizing small towns all over the state. Your honesty led to a major bust. They're saying you might have saved lives." Sarah's mind reeled, unable to process the information. She looked down at Ethan, his small frame racked with labored breathing, and felt a dizzying mix of emotions. Pride at doing the right thing warred with annoying doubt. Could that money have solved their problems? Had she sacrificed Ethan's well-being for the greater good? Before she could respond, a doctor approached, clipboard in hand. Ethan Thompson? He called, his eyes scanning the waiting room. That's us, Sarah said, standing up. To Emily, she added, I've got to go. The doctor's here. I'll call you later, okay? She ended the call, her head spinning with the implications of Emily's news as she followed the doctor to an examination room. The next hour passed in a blur of nebulizer treatments, chest x-rays, and worried consultations. Through it all, Sarah held Ethan's hand, whispering words of encouragement and trying to quell her own rising panic. Finally, the doctor returned with a diagnosis. It's a severe asthma exacerbation, he explained, his tone serious but not alarmist. We've managed to stabilize his breathing, but I'm concerned about the frequency of these attacks. Has he seen a pulmonary specialist recently? Sarah felt a familiar knot of dread in her stomach. No, she admitted. Our insurance, it doesn't cover specialists. We've been managing with his regular pediatrician and the EA when things get bad. The doctor's expression softened with understanding. I see. Well, I'm going to strongly recommend a follow-up with a specialist. In the meantime, we're going to adjust his medication regimen. I'm also going to prescribe a stronger inhaler, but he hesitated, clearly aware of the delicate nature of what he was about to say. It can be quite expensive, even with insurance. Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through calculations, trying to figure out how to make it work. I understand. We'll find a way. As the doctor left to prepare Ethan's discharge papers, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. Hesitantly, she answered. Hello, is this Sarah Thompson? A crisp, professional voice came through the line. Yes, this is she. Miss Thompson, this is Detective Ramirez with the Smallville Police Department. I apologize for calling so late, but we've had some developments regarding the briefcase you turned in earlier today. Would it be possible for you to come down to the station tomorrow morning to answer a few questions? Sarah's heart raced. Yes, I suppose so. But my son, he's in the hospital right now. I'm not sure what time we'll be discharged. I understand, Detective Ramirez replied, his tone softening slightly. Family comes first. How about this? You come by whenever you're able tomorrow. Just ask for me at the front desk. And Miss Thompson, what you did today, it was incredibly brave. You should be proud. As Sarah ended the call, she felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. The events of the day swirled around her like a gathering storm. The briefcase, the mysterious businessman, the drug cartel, Ethan's worsening condition, the looming medical bills. It was all connected somehow, threads of fate weaving together to form a tapestry she couldn't yet comprehend. She looked down at Ethan, who had finally drifted off to sleep, his breathing easier, but still not quite right. In that moment, Sarah made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, she would find a way through. For Ethan, for herself, for the future they both deserved. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, Sarah allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the honest choice she'd made with the briefcase was the first step on a path to something better. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing in her life ever had been. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of possibility on the horizon. The discharge process took longer than expected, with the doctor insisting on one final round of tests before releasing Ethan. By the time they left the hospital, the sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow over Smallville's modest skyline. Sarah's eyes burned with exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. She had promised to meet with Detective Ramirez, and something told her this conversation could be pivotal. After dropping Ethan off with Mrs. Patel, who fussed over him with grandmotherly concern, Sarah made her way to the police station. The squat brick building seemed more imposing than usual, its windows reflecting the midday sun like wary eyes. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead, and pushed through the front doors. The station was a hive of activity, phones ringing and officers bustling about with purposeful energy. At the front desk, a young officer looked up as Sarah approached. Can I help you, ma'am? Yes, I'm here to see Detective Ramirez. My name is Sarah Thompson. The officer's eyes widened with recognition. Oh, of course. The briefcase lady. Everyone's been talking about you. Hold on. I'll let the detective know you're here." As Sarah waited, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into some alternate reality. Just yesterday, she had been invisible, another struggling single mother barely keeping her head above water. Now, people were looking at her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. It was disconcerting, to say the least. "Ms. Thompson?" A deep voice cut through her reverie. She turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes extending his hand. "I'm Detective Ramirez. Thank you for coming in. Please, follow me." He led her to a small interview, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" Sarah shook her head, her nerves making her stomach churn. "No, thank you. I'm fine." Detective Ramirez settled into the chair across from her, his expression serious but not unkind. "First off, Miss Thompson, I want to thank you again for your actions yesterday. You've helped us crack a case we've been working on for months." Sarah nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I just did what I thought was right," she said finally. "And that's exactly what makes it so remarkable," Ramirez replied. "Now, I have a few questions about what happened, if you're up for it. And then, well, there are some things we need to discuss about what happens next." As Sarah recounted the events of the previous day, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. Detective Ramirez listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking for clarification. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Ms. Thompson, what you stumbled upon was much bigger than just a lost briefcase. That money was part of a large-scale drug operation that's been plaguing small towns across the state. Your honesty didn't just return stolen money. It gave us the break we needed to bring down an entire network of criminals." Sarah's mind reeled, trying to process the magnitude of what she was hearing. "I had no idea," she murmured. Detective Ramirez nodded sympathetically. "I know it's a lot to take in. But here's where things get interesting for you, Miss Thompson. There's a substantial reward being offered for information leading to the arrest of these individuals. And given your role in breaking the case wide open, well, let's just say your financial situation is about to change dramatically." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "A reward?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "How much?" The detective slid a piece of paper across the table. Sarah looked down, her eyes widening as she took in the number written there. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life, more than enough to cover Ethan's medical bills, pay off their debts, maybe even buy a small house. This can't be real," she stammered. "I assure you, it's very real," Ramirez replied, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Of course, there will be some paperwork to fill out, and it may take a few weeks for everything to process. But Miss Thompson, your life is about to change. And it's all because you chose to do the right thing." As the full impact of his words began to sink in, Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. All the stress, all the worry, all the late nights wondering how she was going to make ends meet. Could it really be coming to an end? But even as hope bloomed in her chest, a new fear took root. She thought of Ethan, of the life they had built together, despite all the hardships. Would this sudden windfall change things between them? Would it change her? As if reading her thoughts, Detective Ramirez leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Miss Thompson, money has a way of complicating things. But from what I've seen, you're not the type to let it go to your head. Just remember why you're getting this reward. Because of your integrity, your honesty. Don't lose sight of that, and I think you and your son will be just fine." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. As she left the police station, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun, she felt as though she were seeing Smallville with new eyes. The rundown buildings and tired faces that had always seemed like reflections of her own struggles now held the promise of renewal, of second chances. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over Emily's number. There was so much to tell, so much to process. But first, she needed to see Ethan. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As she drove home, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. For the first time in years, the future stretched out before her. not as a daunting challenge to be survived, but as an opportunity to be embraced. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: life in Smallville would never be the same again. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the key in the lock of her small rental house. The events of the past 24 hours felt like a whirlwind, leaving her dizzy with a mixture of hope and apprehension. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of home, a blend of laundry detergent, Ethan's favorite apple juice, and the lingering aroma of last night's dinner grounded her momentarily. "Mama!" Ethan's voice rang out, followed by the patter of small feet. He barreled into her arms, his earlier fatigue seemingly forgotten. Sarah hugged him tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, relishing the solid warmth of his small body against hers. Mrs. Patel appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, a gentle smile on her face. "He's been asking for you every 5 minutes," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I think someone missed his mama." Sarah mouthed a thank you over Ethan's head, grateful once again for her neighbor's kindness. As Mrs. Patel gathered her things to leave, Sarah felt a pang of guilt. How many times had this woman watched Ethan without complaint, never asking for anything in return? It was one of the many debts, not just financial, that Sarah hoped she could now begin to repay. Once they were alone, Sarah settled on the worn sofa with Ethan curled up beside her. His breathing was easier now, but she could still hear a faint wheeze with each exhale. It was a sound that had become all too familiar, a constant reminder of the challenges they faced. "How are you feeling, buddy?" she asked, running her fingers through his tousled hair. Ethan shrugged, his eyes fixed on the cartoons playing softly on the TV. "Okay, I guess. My chest still feels funny sometimes." Sarah's heart clenched. She thought of the new medication the doctor had prescribed, sitting in her purse, still unfilled. Even with her employee discount at the pharmacy, it would stretch their budget to the breaking point. But now, "Ethan," she said softly, turning to face him, "I need to talk to you about something important, something that might change things for us." His brown eyes, so much like his father's, widened with curiosity and a hint of worry. "Are we moving again?" No, Sarah reassured him quickly. "Nothing like that. Remember yesterday, when I found that briefcase at work?" Ethan nodded, his brow furrowing in concentration. "The one with all the money inside? You said we couldn't keep it because it wasn't ours." "That's right," Sarah said, a surge of pride warming her chest at her son's easy grasp of right and wrong. "Well, it turns out that by giving that money back, we helped a lot of people. And because of that, we're going to be getting some money of our own. Money that we can use to make things better." She watched Ethan's face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he was quiet, processing this new information. Then, in a small voice that nearly broke Sarah's heart, he asked, "Does this mean I can get the inhaler that doesn't taste yucky?" Sarah pulled him close, blinking back tears. "Yes, baby, that's exactly what it means. And maybe we can even look for a house with a backyard. Would you like that?" Ethan's face lit up, his earlier fatigue forgotten. "Can we get a dog and a treehouse? And maybe a bike so I can ride to school like Joey?" Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We'll see, buddy. We'll see." As Ethan chattered excitedly about all the possibilities this new future held, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "News is going crazy about the honest supermarket hero. Call me ASAP." Sarah sighed, realizing that their quiet moment of celebration was about to be interrupted by the outside world. She had known, intellectually, that her actions would attract attention, but the reality of it was starting to sink in. Smallville was a small town, and news traveled fast. How would this affect their lives? How would people treat them now? "Hey, Ev," she said, gently interrupting his stream of wishes. "How about we have a special movie night? You pick the film, and I'll make some popcorn. Sound good?" As Ethan bounced off to select a DVD, Sarah retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. She pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing Emily's number. "Sarah." Emily's voice came through, bubbling with excitement. "Oh my God, have you seen the news? You're practically famous." Sarah leaned against the counter, suddenly feeling very tired. "I haven't seen anything," she admitted. "I've been at the hospital with Ethan, and then at the police station. It's all happening so fast. I don't know how to handle this. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Emily spoke again, her tone was more subdued. I'm sorry, I didn't think. How's Ethan doing? He's better, Sarah said, glancing towards the living room where she could hear Ethan humming along with the movie's opening credits. But the doctor wants him to see a specialist. Try some new medications. It's going to be expensive, but she trailed off, still not quite able to believe the turn their fortunes had taken. But now you can afford it, Emily finished for her. Sarah, this is amazing. You deserve this. Both of you do. Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. I know. It's just, I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know? Like this is all too good to be true. Hey, Emily's voice was firm. You did an incredibly brave and honest thing. This isn't luck or charity. You earned this. And knowing you, you'll use it to help others. Just like you've always done even when you had nothing to spare. Sarah took a deep breath, letting Emily's words wash over her. She was right, of course. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. A chance to build a better life for Ethan, and maybe even make a difference in their community. Thanks, Em, she said softly. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what best friends are for, Emily replied, and Sarah could hear the smile in her voice. Now, go spend some time with that amazing kid of yours. And tomorrow, we'll face the craziness together, okay? After hanging up, Sarah rejoined Ethan on the couch, pulling him close as the familiar strains of his favorite superhero movie filled the room. As Ethan's eyes began to droop, his head heavy against her shoulder, Sarah allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in what felt like years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, dealing with sudden attention, managing their newfound financial security, navigating the changes this would bring to their lives. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. Just as Sarah was about to drift off herself, a soft knock at the door jolted her awake. Carefully extricating herself from Ethan's sleeping form, she made her way to the entrance, wondering who could be calling at this hour. She opened the door to find Mike standing there, looking uncomfortable and slightly out of place. Hey, Sarah, he said, shuffling his feet. I hope it's not too late. I wanted to check on you, make sure you're doing okay with all of this. Sarah stepped aside, inviting him in with a gesture. As Mike entered, his eyes took in the modest furnishings, the pile of medical bills on the coffee table, the way Ethan's toys seemed to occupy every available surface. For the first time, Sarah saw her home through an outsider's eyes, and she felt a strange mix of defensiveness and embarrassment. Can I get you something to drink? She offered, more out of habit than genuine hospitality. Mike shook his head. No, thanks. I can't stay long. I just wanted to let you know that corporate called. They're pretty excited about all the positive publicity. They want to do some kind of ceremony, honor you publicly. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Mike, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I didn't do this for attention or rewards. I just did what was right. Mike nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. I know. That's why they want to celebrate you, Sarah. In a world where it seems like everyone's out for themselves, what you did, it gives people hope. It reminds them that there are still good people out there. As his words sank in, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her and Ethan anymore. Somehow, without intending to, she had become a symbol of something larger. I'll think about it, she said finally. But Mike, regardless of what happens with all this publicity stuff, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. The way you fought to keep my hours, how understanding you've been about Ethan's health issues. It means more than I can say. Mike looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. You're a good worker, Sarah, and a good person. I just did what any decent manager would do. As he turned to leave, Mike paused in the doorway. Whatever you decide about the ceremony, just remember, you've earned this. All of it. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. After Mike left, Sarah stood in the quiet living room, her mind whirling with possibilities and concerns. The life she had known, the constant struggle, the endless worry, was over. But what would take its place? As she looked at Ethan, peaceful in sleep, his chest rising and falling with reassuring regularity, Sarah made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever challenges this new chapter might bring, she would face them with the same honesty and integrity that had brought them to this point. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and potential. And for the first time in a very long time, Sarah Thompson allowed herself to dream. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the threadbare curtains, Sarah stirred, momentarily disoriented. The events of the past 2 days came rushing back, and she felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach, tempered now by a flicker of hope. She glanced at the clock, 5:30 ms. Old habits die hard, she thought, remembering countless early mornings rushing to get Ethan ready for school before her shift at the supermarket. But today was different. Mike had insisted she take a few days off to process everything, as he put it. Sarah wasn't sure if she was grateful for the reprieve or anxious about the idle time. She had never been good at sitting still, always needing to be in motion, always planning 3 steps ahead just to stay afloat. She padded quietly to the kitchen, careful not to wake Ethan. As the coffee maker gurgled to life, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Heads up, local news van parked outside your place. Want me to run interference?" Sarah's heart raced. She peeked through the curtains, and sure enough, there was a white van with a satellite dish parked across the street. A young woman with perfectly coiffed hair was touching up her makeup in a handheld mirror, while a man fiddled with a large camera. "Yes, please," Sarah texted back. "Give me 30 minutes to get Ethan up and out. We'll go to your place." She moved quickly, gathering Ethan's school things and packing a small bag for herself. When she gently shook Ethan awake, he blinked up at her in confusion. "No school today, buddy," she said softly. "We're going to have breakfast at Aunt Emily's, okay?" Ethan's face lit up. "Can we have her special pancakes?" Sarah chuckled, grateful for her son's ability to find joy in the simplest things. "I'm sure we can arrange that." As they slipped out the back door, Sarah could hear Emily's voice drifting from the front of the house, cheerfully but firmly deflecting the reporter's questions. She sent up a silent prayer of thanks for her friend's unwavering support. Emily's cozy apartment was a welcome refuge. As promised, she whipped up a batch of her famous blueberry pancakes, the sweet aroma filling the small kitchen. While Ethan happily munched away, occasionally pausing to wipe syrup from his chin, the 2 women huddled over steaming mugs of coffee. "So," Emily said, her tone careful, "what's the plan?" Sarah sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. "I honestly don't know, Em. Part of me wants to just hide away until all this blows over, but I know that's not realistic. And then there's the money," she trailed off, still unable to fully process the reality of their changed circumstances. Emily reached across the table, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. But Sarah, you can't hide from this. Like it or not, you've become a symbol of something important. People are inspired by what you did." As if on cue, Emily's phone chimed with a news alert. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. "Oh, wow. Sarah, you need to see this." She turned the phone around, revealing a video clip from a national morning show. Sarah watched in stunned silence as the host discussed her story, praising her integrity and using phrases like renewed faith in humanity, an example for us all. "This is crazy," Sarah muttered, feeling overwhelmed. "I'm just me, a single mom trying to do right by her. I'm not some hero." "But that's exactly why people are responding to your story," Emily insisted. "You're real, relatable. In a world that often feels dark and selfish, you showed that ordinary people can still choose to do the right thing. Even when it's hard." Single quotes. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching Ethan as he carefully stacked his empty plate and utensils, always eager to help. She thought about all the time she had struggled to make ends meet, all the nights she had lain awake worrying about Ethan's health and their future. How many others were out there, facing similar challenges? "Maybe," she said slowly, an idea beginning to form. "Maybe we can use this attention to do some good. Not just for us, but for others in Smallville. There are so many families struggling, so many kids who need help." Emily's face broke into a wide grin. "Now that sounds like the Sarah I know. What are you thinking?" Over the next hour, as Ethan contentedly watched cartoons in the living room, Sarah and Emily brainstormed. They talked about setting up a foundation to help families with medical expenses, about partnering with local businesses to create job training programs, about renovating the old community center to provide after-school care for working parents. As their ideas flowed, Sarah felt a spark of excitement igniting within her. For so long, she had been focused solely on survival, on making it through each day. Now, for the first time, she allowed herself to think bigger, to imagine a future where she could make a real difference. Their planning session was interrupted by a knock at the door. Emily answered it, returning moments later with a concerned expression and a thick envelope in her hand. "It's for you," she said, handing it to Sarah. "From the police department." Sarah's hand shook slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from Detective Ramirez, along with several official-looking documents. As she read, her eyes widened. "They want me to testify," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The briefcase, it's led them to a much bigger case than they initially thought. "They say my testimony could be crucial in bringing down a major drug trafficking ring." Emily let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's intense. Are you okay with that?" Sarah looked over at Ethan, blissfully unaware of the weight of the decision before her. She thought about all the lives destroyed by drugs, all the communities torn apart. She thought about the example she wanted to set for her son. "I have to do it," she said firmly. "If my testimony can help stop these people, save other families from suffering, then I have to try." Emily nodded, a mix of pride and concern in her eyes. "You know this could be dangerous, right? These aren't small-time criminals we're talking about." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she squared her shoulders. "I know, but I can't just sit back and do nothing. Not when I have the chance to make a real difference." As the reality of her decision sank in, Sarah's mind raced with all the implications. How would this affect Ethan? Would they need protection? And what about all their plans for helping the community? One step at a time, she muttered to herself, a phrase that had become her mantra over years of facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. She turned to Emily, determination etched on her face. "I need to make some calls. Can you watch Ethan for a bit longer?" Emily nodded, pulling her into a tight hug. "Always. And Sarah, I'm proud of you. Whatever happens next, just remember that you're not alone in this." As Sarah stepped out onto Emily's small balcony to make her calls, she took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The sun was fully up now, bathing Smallville in a warm golden light. From this vantage point, she could see the town stretching out before her, the struggling Main Street businesses, the rundown playground where Ethan loved to play, the boarded-up factory that had once been the town's largest employer. But now, instead of seeing only the challenges, Sarah saw potential. Potential for renewal, for growth, for positive change. And somehow, improbably, she found herself at the center of it all. As she dialed Detective Ramirez's number, Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The path ahead was uncertain, possibly even dangerous. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive, filled with purpose. Whatever came next, Sarah Thompson was ready to face it head-on. For Ethan, for Smallville, and for all those who needed a reminder that even in the darkest times, one person's integrity could light the way forward. As Sarah waited for Detective Ramirez to answer, she watched a flock of birds take flight from a nearby rooftop, their synchronized movement a dance against the brightening sky. It struck her as a fitting metaphor for the change sweeping through her life, sudden, beautiful, and slightly terrifying in its unpredictability. "Detective Ramirez speaking," came the gruff voice on the other end of the line. Sarah took a deep breath. "Detective, it's Sarah Thompson. I've made my decision about testifying." There was a pause, and Sarah could almost feel the weight of the moment through the phone. "I'm glad you called, Miss Thompson. Before you tell me your decision, there's something you should know. The situation has escalated." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What do you mean, escalated?" Ramirez sighed heavily. "We've received credible intelligence that the cartel is aware of your involvement. They know you're the one who turned in the briefcase, and they're not happy about it." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened, her knuckles turning white. Are we in danger? Ethan, we're taking every precaution, Ramirez assured her quickly. I've already dispatched officers to secure your home and Miss Chun's apartment. But, Mems Thompson, I need to be clear. If you choose to testify, we'll need to place you and your son in protective custody, at least until the trial is over. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah leaned against the balcony railing, her mind reeling. Protective custody, uprooting their lives, leaving behind everything and everyone they knew. And for how long? But then she thought of the drugs that could have flooded Smallville if that briefcase had reached its intended destination. She thought of kids Ethan's age, their lives destroyed by addiction. She thought of other single mothers struggling to keep their children safe in communities ravaged by crime and poverty. I'll do it, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll testify, but I need your word that Ethan will be safe. That's non-negotiable. You have it, Ramirez replied, respect evident in his tone. We'll arrange everything. A car will be there to pick you up in an hour. Pack only essentials. And Miss Thompson, thank you. What you're doing. It's incredibly brave. As Sarah ended the call, she felt as though she had stepped off a cliff, unsure if she would fly or fall. She turned to find Emily standing in the doorway, concern etched on her face. You heard? Sarah asked, though it wasn't really a question. Emily nodded, pulling her friend into a tight embrace. Oh, Sarah, are you sure about this? Sarah pulled back, meeting Emily's gaze. I have to be. This is bigger than me, Em. Bigger than all of us. If I can help stop these people, make Smallville and other towns safer, I have to try. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. I know. It's who you are. It's why we all love you so much. She wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. Okay, Superwoman, let's get you and Ethan packed. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah gently explained to Ethan that they were going on an adventure, carefully omitting any mention of danger or cartels. To her relief, he seemed more excited than scared, peppering her with questions about where they might go and if they get to ride in a police car with sirens. As they waited for their escort to arrive, Sarah found herself standing in Emily's small living room, surrounded by the few bags they'd hastily packed. The reality of the situation was finally starting to sink in. She might not see this place, or Emily, for months, maybe longer. She started, her voice thick with emotion. I can't thank you enough for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you these past few days. These past few years, really. Emily pulled her into another hug, fierce and protective. You listen to me, Sarah Thompson. You are the strongest, bravest person I know. You're gonna get through this, and when it's all over, you're gonna come back and do amazing things for this town. I just know it. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Detective Ramirez stood there, flanked by two uniformed officers. His expression was grim, but determined. It's time, Miss Thompson, he said softly. Sarah nodded, gathering Ethan close. As they stepped out of the apartment, she turned back for one last look at Emily. Take care of yourself, she said, trying to pour years of friendship and gratitude into those 4 words. Emily managed a watery smile. You too, hero. I'll be here when you get back. Both of you. The ride to the safe house was tense and quiet. Ethan, sensing the gravity of the situation despite Sarah's attempts to keep things light, clung to her side. Sarah stroked his hair absently, her mind racing with all the uncertainties that lay ahead. As they pulled up to a nondescript suburban house, Ramirez turned to face them. This is where you'll be staying for now. There are agents inside who will brief you on security protocols. Miss Thompson, I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know that you're doing the right thing. Your testimony could save countless lives. Sarah nodded, unable to find words. As they were ushered into the house, she felt as though she were stepping into another world. The furniture was generic, the walls bare. It was a far cry from the cozy, lived-in feel of their small apartment, with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in Ethan's artwork. A kind-faced woman introduced herself as Agent Morales, their primary protection detail. She showed them to their rooms, actual separate bedrooms, a luxury Sarah hadn't been able to afford in years, and went over the basic rules. No outside contact, no social media, no leaving the house without express permission and escort. As night fell, Sarah found herself sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and settling noises of the safe house. Ethan had finally drifted off to sleep, exhausted by the day's events. In the quiet, the enormity of her decision pressed down on her. She thought of the life they'd left behind, Ethan's school, her job at the supermarket, Friday night movies with Emily. She thought of the plans they'd made just that morning, dreams of helping their community that now seemed impossibly distant. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she made the right choice? Was she being selfish, risking their safety for some abstract greater good? But then she remembered the look in Detective Ramirez's eyes when he thanked her, the way Emily had called her a hero, the chance to set an example for Ethan about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. This wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she had made her choice, and she would see it through. As she finally lay down to sleep, Sarah allowed herself one small, defiant smile. The cartel might think they could intimidate her, might think they could silence her with threats, but they had underestimated her. They didn't know what she had been through, didn't understand the strength that comes from years of fighting for survival, of putting her child's needs before her own. They thought she was just some small-town supermarket worker. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In the darkness of the safe house, Sarah Thompson made a silent vow. She would testify. She would help bring down this cartel. And when it was all over, she would return to Smallville not just as a survivor, but as someone who had the power and the will to make real change. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Sarah was ready. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly empowered. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head on. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last thought was of Smallville, of home, of the future she was fighting for. And in her dreams, she saw a town reborn, a community healing, all because one ordinary person had chosen to do an extraordinary thing. The days in the safe house blended together, a monotonous rhythm of briefings, preparations, and long hours of waiting. Sarah found herself struggling to maintain a sense of normalcy for Ethan's sake, while simultaneously grappling with the weight of her impending testimony. Agent Morales, true to her initial impression, became a source of steady support. She helped Sarah navigate the complex legal proceedings, patiently explaining each step of the process and what to expect in court. More than that, she became a friendly face in their isolated world, sometimes joining them for meals or bringing small treats for Ethan. "You're doing well, Sarah," Morales said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table after Ethan had gone to bed. "I've worked with a lot of witnesses, and many of them crack under the pressure. But you're made of tougher stuff." Sarah managed a wan smile. "I don't feel very tough most of the time. I'm terrified, if I'm being honest, not just of the cartel, but of letting everyone down. What if I mess up on the stand? What if my testimony isn't enough?" Morales leaned forward, her eyes serious. "Listen to me. Your testimony is crucial, yes, but it's not just about what you say in court. It's about what you represent. You're living proof that ordinary people can stand up to these criminals. That matters, Sarah. It matters a lot." As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself thinking often of Smallville, of Mike and her co-workers at the supermarket, of Mrs. Patel and her kindness, of Emily, who she missed with an ache that surprised her in its intensity. She wondered how the town was faring, if people still talked about her story, or if life had simply moved on. Ethan, for his part, seemed to be adapting to their new situation with the resilience of youth. He threw himself into the schoolwork provided by their protection team and spent hours drawing elaborate pictures of the adventure he imagined they were on. But Sarah noticed the way his eyes would sometimes cloud over with homesickness, the way he would ask increasingly pointed questions about when they could go home. "Soon, buddy," she would say, hoping it wasn't a lie. "We just have to be patient for a little while longer." As the trial date approached, the atmosphere in the safe house grew tenser. Security protocols tightened, and Sarah found herself rehearsing her testimony for hours each day, going over every detail of that fateful afternoon when she found the briefcase. The night before she was set to take the stand, Sarah couldn't sleep. She paced the small confines of her bedroom, her mind racing with all the possible scenarios. What if she froze up? What if the defense attorneys tripped her up? What if the cartel had somehow infiltrated the courthouse? A soft knock at her door startled her out of her spiraling thoughts. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Mama," he said, his voice small. "I had a bad dream." Sarah's heart melted. No matter what else was going on, she was still a mother first. She scooped Ethan up, carrying him to her bed. As they cuddled together in the darkness, she felt some of her anxiety begin to ebb away. "Want to tell me about your dream?" she asked softly. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I dreamed that the bad guys found us," he finally whispered. "That they took you away and I couldn't find you." Sarah's arms tightened around him. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm right here. And I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. We're safe here. But tomorrow, you have to go talk to the judges about the bad guys, right? What if they try to hurt you?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had tried so hard to shield Ethan from the reality of their situation, but kids were perceptive. Of course, he had picked up on the underlying tension. "Ethan, look at me," she said, tilting his chin up so their eyes met in the dim light. "What we're doing here, it's important. Sometimes in life, we have to do hard things because they're the right things to do. The bad guys, they hurt a lot of people. By telling the truth about what I saw, I can help stop them from hurting anyone else." "Like a superhero?" Ethan asked, a note of awe creeping into his voice. Sarah chuckled softly. "Not quite like a superhero. More like, remember when you stood up to that bully who was picking on your friend at school? How scared you were, but you did it anyway because it was the right thing to do?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Well, this is kind of like that, just on a bigger scale. And I promise you, there will be lots of good guys there to keep me safe. Agent Morales, Detective Ramirez, and a whole team of police officers and lawyers." Okay, Ethan said, snuggling closer. "Mama, I'm proud of you." Sarah felt tears prick in her eyes. "Thank you, baby. That means more to me than you know." As Ethan's breathing evened out into sleep, Sarah found her own anxiety had calmed. She was still nervous about the next day, but her son's simple faith in her had rekindled her sense of purpose. She wasn't just doing this for some abstract greater good. She was doing it for Ethan, for his future, for a world where kids like him could grow up safe from the shadow of crime and violence. The next morning dawned bright and clear. As Sarah dressed in the conservative suit provided by the prosecution team, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked different somehow, stronger, more determined. She barely resembled the tired, overwhelmed single mother who had found that briefcase all those weeks ago. Agent Morales arrived to escort them to the courthouse. As they prepared to leave, Ethan hugged Sarah fiercely. "Remember, Mama," he said, his voice muffled against her jacket. "You're my superhero." Sarah knelt down, meeting his eyes. "And you're mine, buddy. I love you so much. I'll see you soon, okay?" The ride to the courthouse was tense and quiet. Sarah's stomach churned with nerves, but beneath the anxiety was a solid core of resolve. As they pulled up to the imposing building, she took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "You've got this, Sarah," Agent Morales said, giving her arm a reassuring squeeze. "Just tell the truth, like we practiced. And remember, you're not alone in there." As Sarah walked up the courthouse steps, flanked by security, she was acutely aware of the cameras and reporters, clamoring for a glimpse of her. But she kept her gaze focused straight ahead, channeling all her energy into the task before her. Inside the courtroom, Sarah's eyes immediately found the defendants, a group of hard-faced men in expensive suits. Their eyes bored into her with undisguised hostility, but Sarah refused to look away. These were the men who had brought so much pain and suffering to communities like Smallville. These were the men she was here to stop. As she took the oath and settled into the witness stand, Sarah felt a strange calm descend over her. The prosecutor approached, his manner reassuring. "Ms. Thompson," he began, "please tell the court, in your own words, what happened on the afternoon of April 15th. Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. As she recounted the events of that day, finding the briefcase, the internal struggle over what to do, her decision to turn it in, she felt the weight of the entire courtroom's attention. But instead of making her nervous, it strengthened her resolve. She spoke clearly and confidently, her voice growing stronger as she described the impact of drug trafficking on communities like hers. She talked about the struggles of single parents, of kids growing up in the shadow of addiction and crime. And she spoke about the importance of integrity, of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. As she finished her testimony, Sarah realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped being afraid. She had found her voice, and she had used it to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The defense attorneys tried to rattle her during cross-examination, implying that she had taken some of the money for herself or that she was exaggerating the amount. But Sarah stood firm, her responses calm and unwavering. When she was finally excused from the stand, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. As she was led out of the courtroom, she caught sight of Detective Ramirez in the gallery. He gave her a subtle nod, his eyes shining with respect and gratitude. In that moment, Sarah knew that regardless of the trial's outcome, she had done something important. She had taken a stand, not just against a specific group of criminals, but against the idea that ordinary people were powerless in the face of injustice. As she was reunited with Ethan back at the safe house, scooping him up in a fierce hug, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, their story would inspire others to find their own courage, to stand up for what's right in their own communities. The journey wasn't over, far from it. But Sarah Thompson had taken a crucial step. From reluctant witness to powerful advocate, she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. And in doing so, she had set in motion changes that would ripple out far beyond the walls of that courtroom, touching lives in ways she could not yet imagine. The days following Sarah's testimony were a blur of nervous energy and cautious hope. As the trial progressed, she found herself glued to the television in the safe house, watching with bated breath as other witnesses took the stand and evidence was presented. Ethan, picking up on her tension, became more clingy than usual, often crawling into her lap as they watched the news together. "Are the bad guys going to jail, Mama?" he would ask, his young face creased with worry. Sarah would pull him close, planting a kiss on the top of his head. "I hope so, buddy. A lot of good people are working very hard to make sure that happens." It was on a crisp autumn morning, nearly 2 months after Sarah had first taken the stand, that the verdict finally came in. Agent Morales burst into the safe house, her normally composed demeanor cracking with excitement. "They did it," she announced, her eyes shining. "Guilty on all counts. Sarah, your testimony was crucial." The prosecutor said, "It was your story that really resonated with the jury." The wave of relief that washed over Sarah was so intense it made her knees buckle. She sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face as the full impact of the news hit her. It was over. They had won. Ethan, not fully understanding but feeding off the emotional energy in the room, threw his arms around her. "Does this mean we can go home now, Mama?" Sarah looked to Agent Morales, who nodded with a smile. "It's safe now. We'll need a few days to make arrangements. But yes, you can go home." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. There were debriefings with the prosecution team, discussions about ongoing security measures, and countless forms to fill out. But through it all, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The constant weight of fear and uncertainty had lifted, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and purpose. As they prepared to leave the safe house, Sarah was surprised by a visit from Detective Ramirez. He shook her hand warmly, his gruff exterior softening with genuine gratitude. "Ms. Thompson, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. Your courage has helped us dismantle one of the largest drug operations in the state. You've saved lives, more than you'll ever know." Sarah felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do," she said softly. Ramirez shook his head. "No, you did what very few would have the courage to do. And there's something else you should know." He paused, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your story has inspired others. Since the trial began, we've seen a significant uptick in tips and witnesses coming forward in other cases. People are starting to believe they can make a difference. As Sarah processed this information, Ramirez handed her an envelope. "This is for you. It's the reward money we discussed, plus a little extra for the inconvenience of protective custody. You've more than earned it." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the envelope. The amount inside was more than she had ever dreamed of possessing. It represented security, opportunity, a chance to give Ethan the life she had always wanted for. But more than that, it represented the power to effect real change in Smallville. The drive back to Smallville was surreal. As familiar landmarks began to appear, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. How much had changed in their absence? How would people react to their return? Her questions were answered as they turned onto Main Street. A crowd had gathered, holding handmade signs and cheering as their car approached. Sarah saw familiar faces: Mike from the supermarket, Mrs. Patel, her co-workers, and at the front of it all, Emily, tears streaming down her face as she waved frantically. As they stepped out of the car, the crowd erupted in applause. Sarah felt overwhelmed, clutching Ethan's hand tightly as people surged forward to welcome them home. There were hugs, words of congratulation, and more than a few tears. Mayor Thompson, no relation, stepped forward, raising his hands for quiet. "Sarah Thompson," he began, his voice ringing out across the square. "On behalf of Smallville, I want to thank you for your incredible bravery and integrity. You've not only helped bring criminals to justice, but you've reminded us all of the power of doing what's right, no matter the cost." He paused, a smile spreading across his face. "And that's why I'm honored to announce that the City Council has unanimously voted to establish the Sarah Thompson Community Foundation, dedicated to supporting families in need and fighting against the influence of drugs in our town." Sarah gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. She hadn't expected this, hadn't even considered the possibility that her actions would lead to such a concrete change in Smallville. As the crowd cheered, Emily pushed her way forward, enveloping Sarah in a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "And I hope you're ready, because this is just the beginning." People are fired up, Sarah. They want to make real changes here, and they're looking to you to lead the way. Over the next few weeks, as Sarah and Ethan settled back into their old routines, she found that Emily's words were proving prophetic. People stopped her on the street, not just to congratulate her, but to share ideas for community improvement projects, to volunteer their time and skills. The reward money, combined with donations that had poured in during the trial, provided a solid foundation for the new community organization. Sarah threw herself into the work with a passion that surprised even her. She coordinated with local law enforcement to establish drug prevention programs in schools. She worked with Emily to set up a support group for single parents. And in a move that brought her journey full circle, she partnered with Mike to create a job training program based out of the supermarket. One evening, as Sarah sat at their kitchen table in a new, safer apartment purchased with part of the reward money, poring over plans for a community garden project, she felt a small hand on her arm. She looked up to see Ethan, his eyes serious. "Ma," he said, "are you happy?" Sarah paused, really considering the question. The past few months had been a whirlwind of activity, filled with challenges and triumphs. She was busier than she had ever been, often working long hours to get the foundation off the ground. But as she looked at her son, she realized that happy didn't begin to cover what she felt. "You know what, buddy? I am happy. Really, truly happy. Are you?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "I like our new home, and I like that you're helping people. The kids at school say you're a hero." Sarah pulled him into her lap, marveling at how quickly he was growing. "Wow, you're my hero, Ethan. You were so brave through everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you." As they sat there, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the moment she had found that briefcase, through the fear and uncertainty of the trial, to this new chapter of their lives, it had been a transformation she could never have imagined. She thought of the briefcase, of that moment of temptation when she had considered keeping the money. How different would their lives be now if she had made that choice? They might have had financial security, yes, but at what cost? she wouldn't have this sense of purpose, this feeling of making a real difference in her community. More than that, she wouldn't be setting this example for Ethan. She looked at her son, seeing in his eyes the same determination, the same desire to do good that had driven her through this ordeal. She had shown him that one person, no matter how ordinary they might seem, could stand up and change things for the better. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan spoke up. "Mama, when I grow up, I want to help people too, just like you." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride and love. "You already do, sweetheart. Every day, just by being you, you make the world a little bit better." Later that night, as Sarah stood by Ethan's bedside, watching him sleep peacefully, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over. Their life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to face, still moments of doubt and worry. But they were facing those challenges together, and they were part of a community that had come together in ways she had never thought possible. Sarah Thompson, once just a struggling single mother trying to make ends meet, had become something more. Not a hero, exactly. She still felt uncomfortable with that label, but a catalyst, perhaps. A reminder that integrity and courage could spark real change. As she turned out the light and softly closed Ethan's door, Sarah smiled to herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly ready to face whatever came their way. The story of the honest employee who found a briefcase full of money had evolved into something much larger, a story of community, of resilience, and of the power of one person's choice to do the right thing. And in Smallville, and perhaps beyond, that story was just beginning. As the seasons changed and Smallville settled into a new rhythm, Sarah found herself at the center of a quiet revolution. The Sarah Thompson Community Foundation had become a catalyst for change, sparking initiatives that touched every corner of the town. But with this growing influence came new challenges and responsibilities that tested Sarah's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah stood before the mirror, adjusting the blazer of her new suit, a far cry from her old supermarket uniform. She was due to give a presentation to the city council, outlining the foundation's plans for a comprehensive youth center. As she smoothed down her collar, she caught sight of a photo tucked into the corner of the mirror frame. It was a snapshot from the day they'd returned to Smallville. Ethan's beaming face pressed against hers amidst the crowd of well-wishers. "You've got this, Mama," she whispered to herself, channeling Ethan's unwavering faith in her. The city council meeting was packed, every seat filled and people standing along the walls. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves as she approached the podium, but as she began to speak, her voice grew stronger, fueled by passion for the project. "This youth center isn't just about giving kids a place to hang out after school," she explained, her eyes meeting those of each council member in turn. "It's about creating a safe space where they can learn, grow, and envision a future free from the influences that have held our community back for too long." As she delved into the details, mentorship programs, job skills workshops, arts and sports activities, Sarah could see the council members leaning in, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine engagement. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Mayor Thompson stood up, a broad smile on his face. "Ms. Thompson, once again, you've shown us the power of grassroots change. I think I speak for the entire council when I say we're fully behind this project." The vote was unanimous, and as Sarah left the meeting, she felt a surge of accomplishment. But mixed with the elation was a twinge of something else, a growing awareness of the weight of expectations now resting on her shoulders. This feeling only intensified over the next few weeks as the youth center project got underway. Sarah found herself juggling contractor meetings, fundraising events, and community outreach efforts, often working late into the night. Ethan, now in 3rd grade and thriving in his new school, was understanding but increasingly vocal about missing their time together. One evening, as Sarah pored over budget spreadsheets at the kitchen table, she felt a small hand on her arm. Looking up, she met Ethan's concerned gaze. "Mama, are you going to miss my play tomorrow?" he asked, his lower lip quivering slightly. Sarah's heart sank. In the whirlwind of activity, she had completely forgotten about Ethan's school performance. "Oh, buddy, I'm so sorry. Of course I'll be there. Nothing's more important than you. You know that, right?" Ethan nodded, but Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. It was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the delicate balance she was trying to maintain between her newfound purpose and her most important role, being Ethan's mother. The next day, Sarah made sure to leave work early, slipping into the school auditorium just as the lights dimmed. As she watched Ethan take the stage, delivering his lines with a confidence that made her heart swell, she felt a renewed sense of perspective. Yes, the work she was doing was important, but moments like these, seeing the pride in her son's eyes as he spotted her in the audience, these were the real measure of success. After the play, as they walked home hand in hand, Sarah made a silent vow to herself. She would find a way to balance her responsibilities, to be both the community leader people were looking to and the mother Ethan needed. This resolution was put to the test sooner than she expected. The following week, as Sarah was in the middle of a crucial meeting with potential donors for the youth center, her phone buzzed with a call from Ethan's school. Her stomach dropped as she excused herself to answer. "Miss Thompson? This is Nurse Grady from Smallville Elementary. Ethan's had an asthma attack. It's under control now, but we think you should come pick him up." Sarah's mind raced. The meeting she was in could secure funding that would make a huge difference to the youth center project. But Ethan, there was no question. "I'll be right there," she said, already gathering her things. As she rushed to explain the situation to the donors, Sarah was surprised by their response. Instead of frustration at the interrupted meeting, they expressed concern and understanding. "Family comes first, Miss Thompson," the lead donor, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, said with a nod. "That's a value we can certainly get behind. Go take care of your boy. We can reschedule." As Sarah hurried to the school, she felt a mix of relief and something approaching revelation. She had been so focused on proving herself, on living up to the image of the honest hero that had been thrust upon her, that she'd almost lost sight of the very values that had led her to this point. Ethan was pale but smiling weakly when she arrived at the nurse's office. As she gathered him into her arms, Sarah felt the familiar fierce surge of love and protectiveness. This, she reminded herself, was why she had turned in that briefcase. This was why she had testified, why she was working so hard to make Smallville a better place. Not for recognition or praise, but for Ethan and all the other children who deserved a safe, nurturing community to grow up in. Over the next few months, Sarah worked on finding a better balance. She delegated more responsibilities at the foundation, empowering others to take leadership roles. She made sure to be home for dinner with Ethan most nights, helping with homework and listening to his stories about school and friends. The youth center project progressed, slowly but surely. There were setbacks, funding shortfalls, zoning issues, skeptics who doubted the impact it would have. But there were triumphs too. The day the first wall went up, half the town seemed to turn out to watch, many volunteering their time to help with the construction. Sarah stood back, watching as Emily directed a group of volunteers in painting a vibrant mural on one of the interior walls. Mike from the supermarket was there too, discussing plans for a job shadowing program with some of the local business owners. Mrs. Patel had shown up with enough homemade samosas to feed an army, insisting that no one could work on an empty stomach. As she took in the scene, Sarah felt a tugging on her hand. She looked down to see Ethan, his face alight with excitement. "Can I help paint, Mama? Please?" Sarah smiled, ruffling his hair. "Of course you can, buddy. This place is for you and all the other kids in Smallville. It should have your mark on it too." As she watched Ethan join the other children, paintbrush in hand and tongue sticking out in concentration, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. This was what it was all about. Not just making big, sweeping changes, but creating moments like these, where a community came together, where children felt valued and empowered. Later that evening, as Sarah tucked an exhausted but happy Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, I'm really proud of you," he said softly. "You're making Smallville better for everyone." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. But you know what? I couldn't do any of this without you. You're my inspiration, My reason for everything. Single quotes. As she turned out the light and quietly closed Ethan's door, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From that fateful day in the supermarket parking lot to now, it had been a path filled with challenges, fears, and difficult choices. But it had also been a journey of growth, of finding strength she never knew she had, of rediscovering the power of community and the impact one person's integrity could have. Sarah Thompson, once just another struggling single mother, had become a symbol of hope and change for Smallville. But more importantly, she had become the person she had always hoped to be, someone who could make a real difference, someone her son could look up to, someone who stayed true to her values even when it was difficult. As she settled onto the couch with a cup of tea, looking over the plans for the youth center's grand opening, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its own challenges, but she was ready to face them. With Ethan by her side and a community rallying around her, Sarah knew that anything was possible. The honest employee who found a briefcase full of money had set in motion a chain of events that was still unfolding, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. And in Smallville, a town once struggling under the weight of economic hardship and encroaching crime, a new story was being written, a story of resilience, of community, and of the extraordinary power of ordinary people choosing to do the right thing. As the crisp autumn air gave way to the first chill of winter, Smallville buzzed with anticipation. The youth center, a project that had united the town in ways few could have imagined, was finally ready for its grand opening. Sarah stood at the entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Ethan was by her side, practically vibrating with energy, his hand clasped tightly in hers. "Are you ready, Mama?" he asked, looking up at her with shining eyes. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding. "As ready as I'll ever be, buddy. Let's do this." As they pushed open the doors, Sarah was overwhelmed by the sight that greeted them. The once abandoned building had been transformed into a vibrant, welcoming space. Bright murals adorned the walls, comfortable seating areas invited conversation, and state-of-the-art computers hummed in the learning center. But it was the people that truly brought the place to life. The room was packed with familiar faces, all beaming with pride and excitement. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, raising his hands for quiet. "Friends, neighbors, fellow Smallville residents," he began, his voice ringing out across the crowded room. "Today marks a new chapter in our town's history. This youth center is more than just a building. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together, when we choose hope over despair, action over apathy." He turned to Sarah, gesturing for her to join him. As she stepped up, a hush fell over the crowd. Sarah felt a moment of panic. Public speaking had never been her strong suit. But then, she caught sight of Emily giving her an encouraging thumbs up, and Mike nodding reassuringly from the back of the room. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "A little over a year ago, I was just another person struggling to make ends meet," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today. But life has a way of presenting us with unexpected choices, moments that define who we are and who we want to be." She paused, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the faces of people who have become not just neighbors, but true friends and allies. "This center isn't about me or any one person. It's about all of us, our hopes, our dreams for our children, our belief that Smallville can be more than what it was. It's about creating a place where every child can feel safe, valued, and inspired to reach for their full potential." As Sarah continued, she felt a surge of emotion welling up inside her. She spoke about the challenges they'd faced in bringing this project to life, but also the incredible outpouring of support from the community. She talked about the programs they had planned, tutoring sessions, art classes, sports leagues, job training workshops, and the difference they hoped to make in young lives. But most of all, she concluded, her voice thick with emotion, "This center is a promise to our children that we believe in them, that we're willing to fight for their future, a promise that no matter where they come from or what obstacles they face, they have a whole community standing behind them, ready to lift them up." As Sarah finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. She felt Ethan's arms wrap around her waist in a fierce hug, and she bent down to embrace him, blinking back tears. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Sarah watched with joy as kids explored the center, their eyes wide with wonder. She overheard excited conversations about upcoming programs, saw parents sighing in relief at the thought of a safe place for their children after school. It was everything she had hoped for and more. As the crowd began to thin out in the late afternoon, Sarah found herself in a quiet corner with Emily and Mike. They clinked their glasses of sparkling cider together in a small toast. "We did it," Emily said, her eyes shining. "Sarah, I hope you know how much you've inspired all of us. This place, it's going to change lives." Mike nodded in agreement. "I've lived in Smallville my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this. It's like the whole town has woken up." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "I couldn't have done any of this without you both, without everyone who believed in this crazy dream." As they chatted, Sarah's eyes kept drifting to Ethan, who was engrossed in a chess game with one of the volunteer mentors. Seeing him so at ease, so engaged, filled her with a profound sense of peace. This was why she had done all of this, not just for Ethan, but for all the children of Smallville who deserved a chance to thrive. Later that evening, as Sarah and Ethan walked home hand in hand, the streets of Smallville seemed different somehow. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. "Mama," Ethan said suddenly, his voice thoughtful, "do you think I could volunteer at the center when I'm older? To help other kids like people helped us?" Sarah felt her heart swell with pride. "Of course you can, sweetheart. That's what it's all about, paying it forward, helping others the way we've been helped." As they reached their apartment, Sarah paused, looking back at the town stretching out behind them. She thought about how far they had come, how much had changed since that fateful day in the supermarket parking lot. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of overwhelming pressure. But standing here now, with Ethan by her side, and the knowledge of what they had accomplished, she knew she wouldn't change a thing. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah sat at her small desk, opening a journal she had started keeping shortly after the trial. She began to write, pouring out her thoughts and feelings about the day's events. As her pen moved across the page, she found herself reflecting not just on the youth center, but on the larger journey that had brought her to this point. She wrote about the moment she had found the briefcase, the internal struggle she had faced. She wrote about the fear during the trial, the uncertainty of protective custody, but mostly, she wrote about the unexpected gifts that had come from that one decision to do the right thing, the strengthened bond with Ethan, the deep friendship she had formed, the sense of purpose she had discovered. As she wrote, Sarah realized that her story, their story, was far from over. The youth center was not an endpoint, but a beginning. There was still so much work to be done in Smallville, so many lives to touch, so many positive changes to make. But for the first time, Sarah felt truly ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had discovered a strength within herself that she never knew existed, a capacity for leadership that had surprised everyone, including herself. More than that, she had rediscovered the power of community, of what could be accomplished when people came together for a common cause. As she closed her journal, Sarah's eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk. It was a picture from the day she had testified, Ethan's small face peering out from behind her protectively as they faced a sea of reporters. Next to it stood a more recent photo, Sarah and Ethan at the youth center construction site, both covered in paint and grinning widely. The contrast between the two images struck her forcefully. They had been through so much, had grown and changed in ways she could never have anticipated. Yet through it all, the core of who they were, the bond between mother and son, the desire to do good in the world, had remained unshakable. Sarah reached out, touching the images gently. "Look at us now, buddy," she whispered. "Look at how far we've come." As she got ready for bed, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for Ethan's unwavering love and support. Gratitude for friends like Emily and Mike, who had stood by her through thick and thin. Gratitude for a community that had rallied around her vision and made it a reality. But most of all, Sarah felt grateful for that moment of choice. that split second when she had decided to turn in the briefcase, setting in motion a chain of events that had transformed not just her life, but the lives of so many others. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's mind was filled with images of the future, of Ethan growing up surrounded by opportunities and support, of Smallville continuing to evolve and thrive, of more lives touched and changed by the ripple effects of one honest act. The story of Sarah Thompson, the honest employee who found a briefcase full of money, had become so much more than she could have ever imagined. It had become a story of transformation, of the power of integrity, and of the incredible impact that one person's choice can have on an entire community. And in Smallville, as the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the town in a soft white glow, that story was still being written, one day, one life, one act of kindness at a time.
If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings.